February to April, a wave of anti-government protests erupted throughout the cities in Venezuela. Opposition to President Nicolas Maduro is organizing a mass protest in scope of faulty policies that are bringing the Latin American oil giants to economic and social disasters. Our reporters have gone into the streets of Caracas and other cities to investigate the institutionalized abuses of human rights, resulting in deaths, torture, and the corruption of the Venezuelan legal system.
On the streets of a Caracas suburb, Alejandra Rodriguez is chanting alongside at least 40 protesters. She is leading the crowd that is equipped with gas masks and protest signs. Through a microphone, Rodriguez condemns the socialist regime for allowing the country to descend into crisis. After about 25 minutes at the head of the rally, Alejandra speaks to one of our interviewers.
What are some of the reasons for which people have taken to the streets today?
We're all neighbors here in El Carrizal. Our focus today is to outcry the violent suppression of protests in March by the National Guard. Many of the supporters here today were victims of the use of tear gas. Some of them were also hit by rubber bullets. Police and the National Guard have used beatings and detainment as well. Any anti-government position is vulnerable to human rights abuses. This is what we cannot tolerate and why we're out here today.
What has been the most devastating effect of the suppression of the protests thus far?
In the past month, over 40 people have died in waves of protests. Most have been either civilians or anti-government rioters. The main issue is that what had started as peaceful demonstrations has escalated to full-blown riots. Every time a group gathers, security forces will attempt to quell them using anti-riot weapons, and the opposition itself retaliates using rocks or molotovs. Both sides are taking casualties, but the first action is almost always taken by the government-controlled security forces.
Rodriguez is considered a moderate in the struggle between the government and opposition. Her cause is to stop violence, more than overthrow the regime, but she acknowledges that the abuses have been mostly orchestrated by either Maduro himself or other government agencies or officials trying to retain the power of the established government.
Are the protesters worried about the possibility of forceful oppression by the government?
We are conscientious of the tactics that this government is using against its own people. We cannot resign our advocacy of human rights to fear. We will continue on the streets until the government stops the use of violence to maintain order, suppress freedom of speech, and establish the authoritarianism that has been pursued since 1998.
The day continues, and as police reinforcements arrive, detainments commence. Supporters with children can be seen running south, while the security forces position themselves north of Plaza Bolivar. Youths begin to quarrel with the officers, and the crowd is mostly dispersed with a few exceptions, some of which are arrested, including Alejandra Rodriguez. In most parts of the country, similar protests are subdued every week. Most of those arrested in the protests are subject to prosecution, and in many cases, illegal practices by both police and the judiciary are dominating the punishment of demonstrators. It has been reported in different states that what follows anti-government arrests have been other violations of law and human rights, infesting the Venezuelan legal system. Our team traveled to Valencia, where reports of heinous crimes committed by police and other security forces violated warrant, arrest, and prosecution laws, in addition to the continuous cycle of brutality endured by detainees. Miguel Gonzalez is a public defense attorney and has witnessed the process used by the security forces from within the Valencia Criminal Court. He met with our interviewers after the trial of one of the protesters arrested March 20th.
Can you describe what occurs once the protesters are arrested?
First, most operations occur without official warrants or permissions from judges. Many of those arrested often claim their rights. However, the police and National Guardsmen will proceed to assault them, either with beatings or with rubber bullets. Even many of those who do not attempt resisting the police in fear are violently arrested. After this, they are supposed to be taken to either local police stations. However, the amount of detainees in each of these stations has resulted in the illegal use of military bases for detention of these detainees.
Once under custody, how are the arrested taken care of?
Most of the detainees are held without being allowed the right to communicate with their relatives or with their attorneys. This is illegal under Venezuelan law. Additionally, there have been incidents at detention centers where detainees are held for more than double the legal amount of detention time without communication or legal counsel. They are then presented to prosecutors who have, in many instances, forged evidence to support their false charges.
Mr. Gonzalez, who has witnessed the events, also knows the legal procedures that have occurred in recent months. He notes that the process taking place to prosecute those arrested as a result of the protests is corrupt, illegal, and influenced by the government in Caracas.
What happens during the trials?
The hearings that follow are deliberately unorganized and one-sided. Most judges are sympathetic towards the establishment. They often base their decisions on police reports rather than testimonies. Most of the rulings require those accused to be released with conditional liberty, banning them from participating in demonstrations and other infringements on civil liberties. There is no surprise or doubt amongst the opposition that the judiciary system has fallen to the direct control of the regime. The rampant abuses committed are becoming acceptable by law and protected under the power of the traditionally independent judiciary. With this additional pillar of power, the government can strengthen its already tyrannical rule. With the courts within his grasp, Maduro can easily bend national law to his advantage.
Western media has failed to cover it. To some extent, Maduro has made it more difficult for Western media to enter the country, with due reason. However, during the past week, the United States House of Representatives passed resolutions sanctioning individuals associated with human rights abuses in Venezuela, led by South Florida Representative Ileana Ross-Layton. But the sanctions seem weak, and mostly a response to the pleas of the Venezuelan community in Miami. The political climate in Caracas looks grim. With a semi-tyrannical leader, the resource-rich nation finds itself in economic ruins and social upheaval. For now, the solution so far has been the employment of repressive tactics to keep the increasingly uneasy opposition in check. The turmoil seems to be calming since April, but as the general state of Venezuela continues to worsen, the regime can expect a renewed wave of protests, riots, and opposition.